It's lunchtime, and not only did I eat some noodles, but I also had some of this Coke Zero. Why? What motivated me to drink Coke Zero? What motivated me to eat noodles? Um, Coke Zero is pretty satisfying. What makes me that feeling of happiness and satisfaction that you get when you drink something that you like, be it Coke Zero, be it something else. Motivation and emotion. Motivation. Why do we do things? What's our reasoning behind it? Emotion. Feelings. What are feelings? How do they come about? First, we want to talk about motivation. For instance, why might I have drank this Coke Zero? Well, there's two big things. There's intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is it just feels good. I want to do it for me. Intrinsically, I like it. I drink Coke Zero because it tastes good. Okay? Extrinsic motivation, you do it for an extrinsic reason. The classic extrinsically motivated reason would be you go to work because you get a paycheck. You study because you get a grade. Okay? It's nothing internal. There's some things that may motivate you in both ways. Studying, you may be motivated both intrinsically and extrinsically. You may be motivated intrinsically because you're learning something and you really want to learn, and you may be motivated extrinsically because you want the grade. So intrinsic would be just for its own sake, to better your own self. Extrinsic is for some reinforcement, be it a grade, be it money, things like that, or the avoidance of punishment. So extrinsic would be sort of that environmental, something from the environment motivates you. So that's intrinsic versus extrinsic. There's also general theories as to motivation. There's instinct theory. Instinct theory is the theory that some things are just inborn, that we're just meant to do it. Babies sucking on a pacifier, instinct. Babies, when you put your hand around like this, it's those reflexes. So when you think instincts, think things like that. It's the way we're born. Some people would say it's an instinct for us to drink and eat because that's what our body needs. Our body needs water. So it's our instinct to drink water and to eat food because it's a survival thing. That's instinct theory. The next thing is drive theory. And when you think of drive theory, it's often used in a lot of biological motives too. I have an unpleasant sense in my body called thirst. Taking a drink of the Coke Zero helps alleviate that unpleasant sense in my body. That's what drive theory is. Drive theory is that your body is in a state of tension. Your body has a need, okay? Typically it's biological, but it can be other. But drive theory is your body is in a state of disequilibrium. Okay? There's something not right. There's a state of tension. And you are motivated to move your body back to a state of homeostasis or equilibrium to relieve that tension. I'm thirsty. In order to alleviate the thirst, I drink. I'm hungry. In order to alleviate that hunger, I eat. That's drive theory. So why might we be motivated to do something? Because we're in some kind of state of tension and we want to relieve that tension. That's drive theory. The other types of theories are cognitive theories, and typically those focus more on external motivations. Why am I drinking Coke Zero and not regular Coke? Well, cognitively, Coke Zero doesn't have any calories. And I know I don't need the calories. So thinking through, even though both of them might taste fine, thinking through, I'm going to pick the one that's healthy. Why would I choose not to eat chocolate? Because cognitively, I'm going through and I'm saying, okay, yes, my instincts are saying, my mouth wants chocolate. It would taste good, but cognitively, I'm thinking through what would be the best for me in the long run. And the best would be not to eat the chocolate. So, cognitive theory is that there are sometimes we're motivated by things other than just internal drives. Sometimes it's more our thought processes. We get up and exercise. It might not necessarily feel good, and it may be, I'm going to do it because I need to. It's good for me. Why do some people eat their vegetables? Some people eat their vegetables because they taste good and they like them. Some people eat their vegetables because they know they should, because it's good for them. That's what the cognitive theory of motivation is. It's that thought piece. Either because you're making a conscious decision to do it, because you're thinking it through, or there may be some external reinforcement or punishment going on that's causing you to do it. Cognitive theory would be, oh, why am I motivated to slow down on this road? Because I know there's police cars there. That would be a cognitive motivation. I don't want to get a ticket. It has nothing to do with alleviating an unpleasant sense of tension. It's not an instinct. It's thinking through it. That's the cognitive theory. We have some other things that have to do with motivation. One is level of arousal. And really, level of arousal is kind of how pumped up you are, how alert and focused you are. And most people have what's called an optimum level of arousal. Sometimes we're motivated to get that level of arousal to its optimum. Sometimes when we're bored, we do stuff to alleviate that boredom because our level of arousal is so low. Sometimes when we're stressed, we do stuff to calm ourselves down. Maybe I'm drinking Coke Zero because I'm stressed and it helps calm me down and alleviate the stress. That could be part of it. That's level of arousal. Is we all have this optimal level. Some people's level of optimal level of arousal is higher than others. Some people might call themselves adrenaline junkies. They like to have a pretty high level of arousal. Some people are more laid back and they like a lower level of arousal. Along with that, there's this thing called the Yerkes-Dodson law, and that's the fact that different levels of arousal are optimal for different types of tasks. We can have a higher level of arousal if the task we're doing is easier. If we're doing a difficult task, then we may need to tamper it a little bit. It's a function of the difficulty of the task, that optimal level of arousal. There's a couple other things that I want to talk about when it comes to motivation. One is self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is this idea of I can do it, deciding whether or not you can do something. Do I have self-efficacy that I can finish this Coke Zero? Yes. That's a very simple thing when it comes to self-efficacy. I mean, just a simple, do I think I can do it? Yes, I can finish the Coke Zero. Okay? Now, self-efficacy can be different depending on task. Do I have self-efficacy that I can solve a statistics problem? Yeah. If it's not something that I know right away, if it's a more advanced problem, I feel like I could figure it out because I've taught statistics for years. Do I have self-efficacy that I could run a mile in under 10 minutes? No way, Jose. I'm not a runner. I'm not in that good a shape. I would say no, there's no way I can do that. Do I have self-efficacy that I could pass a calculus test right now? No, I couldn't. If I was given a day or two to practice it, maybe. But if somebody put a calculus test in front of me, I would bomb it because I haven't had it since I was in college. Would I be able to learn it? Yeah, I have the I believe I can. It's that I think I can kind of thing, the little engine that could. That's what self-efficacy is. It's that idea of, do you think you can do it? And again, it's different depending on, you can have self-efficacy, high self-efficacy for some things and low self-efficacy for another. And having low self-efficacy for something isn't necessarily bad. I have low self-efficacy that I could run a mile in under 10 minutes. I don't think I can do it. Is that a bad thing? I should be in better shape. I probably should be able to do that. But is that detrimental to my psychological, to my entire self-esteem? No, because I don't consider myself a runner. So self-efficacy is one of those things, can I do it? And it varies from thing to thing. People can have high self-efficacy in some places and low for others. And it really affects your self-esteem if you have low self-efficacy in things that you think are important. That's when it can be a detriment. Two other things that I want to talk about before we move on to specific motivations. One is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow is a humanistic psychologist, and he is pretty famous in motivation for what he calls his hierarchy of needs. He's basically saying people are motivated to achieve certain needs, and he has this pyramid, okay? At the bottom of the pyramid are physiological needs. In other words, before we can focus on anything else, guess what? We have to have hydration. Okay. In other words, we don't necessarily have to have Coke Zero, but we need to have water. We need to not be thirsty, not be hungry. We need to not be sick, sort of physiological needs. We need to be healthy. So the base, physiological needs. Once that base of physiological needs is taken care of, then we move on to safety needs. Do we feel safe and secure? Again, this is the bottom level is physiological. Then we move on to safety needs. Okay, so once we get our biology taken care of, then we get our, do we feel safe and secure taken care of? And then we get into higher level needs. We get into belongingness. We get into, do we feel like we're part of the group? Do we have family and friends and those associations? Because think about it. You talk in lifespan development about attachment and contact comfort. That's where this comes in, that belongingness, those needs to be with other people. So we have basic physiological, shelter, food, drink. We have safety. Then we have belongingness. And then we have esteem. We want to have at least some people that think we're cool. We want to have at least some people that look up to us. Does that mean that, we have to be the top in everything and everybody has to look up to us? No. It means that we at least have to have some people that hold us in high regard. That's the esteem. And then once we get that, the top of Maslow's pyramid, the top of the thing, once you take care of that physiological, the safety, the belongingness, the esteem, the top of his pyramid was something called self-actualization. And that's bettering yourself. So once you have met all the other criteria, once you're physiologically taken care of, once you're safe, once you have friends and family, once you have at least some people that look up to you, then you're like, okay, what can I do to improve myself? Becoming all you can be, becoming your best. That's what self-actualization is. And the theory is you can't do that unless all those other bottom needs are met. That's Maslow. The reason it's humanistic is because it gets into all that human beings be all you can be, and you're in charge of your own destiny. That it has those kind of undertones, and that's why it would be in that humanistic camp. So that's Maslow. The last thing I want to talk about when we talk about some motivational, just general constructs, is the idea of achievement motivation. There's whole literature on what's called achievement motivation in terms of what makes people want to succeed or not. What what drives people to want to perform, to want to get that degree, to want to set that record. And there's a lot of different things. It goes into that intrinsic versus extrinsic. It goes into mastery motivation. In other words, you're motivated to master something versus motivated to win and compete. There's a lot of different things in that achievement motivation construct. There's also this expectancy value theory. There's this, are you motivated to succeed? Well, do you expect to succeed? Is it important to you? So there's a lot of different things in there. There's a whole literature on that. So that's achievement motivation. Now, that's general motivation. What we want to do, and when you talk about motivation, there's two specific motives that people usually delve into in detail. One is hunger and eating, and the other is sex. Hunger and eating, we have the question of why do we eat? And why do we drink? Why did I eat my noodles for lunch? Why am I drinking Coke Zero? Well, there are physiological mechanisms for eating. There's basically physiological, biological. Our stomach growls. There's a hormone called ghrelin, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, and it's part of what makes your stomach contract and growl. That's a sign that you are hungry. Level of glucose. If your glucose level's low, message, hunger, hunger, hunger. Leptin, which is the fat, level of fat in your bloodstream. If it's low, hunger, hunger, hunger. If it's high, no more food, no more food. Same thing, glucose. If your glucose level is high, no more food, no more food. Those are some physiological mechanisms. The part of the brain that is most linked to hunger and thirst is the hypothalamus. And literally, they've done some research on rats where they zapped part of the hypothalamus. And there's one part that if you zap it, they have no desire to eat. They'll just sit there and they won't eat, and they'll just basically waste away. They have no trigger for hunger. There's another part of the hypothalamus that if you zap, they have no trigger for being full, for satiety, which is the fancy word for being full. And they just eat themselves to death. They just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. There's no mechanism that says, stop, I'm full. Do we always listen to our physiology when it comes to eating? Now, if you were telling the truth when I asked that, do we always listen to physiology when it comes to eating? Most people would have to admit they don't always. And from person to person, it varies. Physiology is not the only reason we eat. Okay? There have been many times that I've eaten a cookie or eaten something sweet when my body was not telling me I was hungry. I was not hungry at all. I would venture to say a lot of people in the U.S. where food tends to be available for most, there's times when we eat when we don't need to. We eat, our body's not telling us we're full, but we eat anyway. Why? Well, there's some psychological mechanisms too. The sight and smell of food. You go into a house and somebody made chocolate chip cookies, and you're smelling the chocolate chip cookies. It tempts you to eat them. You go into a movie theater, and what do you smell? Popcorn. You're tempted to eat it because of the sight and smell of it. And you're also tempted to eat it because you're seeing other people doing it. And it's that vicarious reinforcement. You're seeing other people eating and drinking and enjoying it, getting rewarded for it, essentially, getting reinforced. So it's that vicarious reinforcement. So you model that behavior of other people. Another psychological mechanism when it comes to food is time of day. It's 12 o'clock. It's time for lunch. Oh my gosh, it's 7 o'clock. Oh, We haven't eaten dinner yet. Sometimes we are not necessarily motivated by whether we are actually hungry, but time of day. It's habits. So we have habits, we have sight and smell, we have peer pressure, or seeing vicarious reinforcement. There's a lot of different other psychological things that motivate us to eat. There's being stressed, eating as a stress relief, eating to relieve boredom. How many of you eat if you're bored? I'll raise my hand. Eating when you're bored, eating when you're stressed. Those are different psychological, it's that psychological reasons for eating or drinking. So there's that. There's also a couple different things with, a couple other things with eating. There's set point theory, which is this theory that our body is used to a certain, being at a certain weight. And our body will fight to stay at that weight. Our body has a weight that it is comfortable at. Used to be more of a thing than it is. When food was not as plentiful, then that was more of an issue. That our body it had a point that it was comfortable and it naturally stayed at that comfort level. Now, what you see is in a lot of places, there are more psychological motives for eating, and they're kind of overpowering that set point. Set point is more of a biological mechanism, but we can overpower that by eating too much, which leads to the next thing, which is obesity. Right now, about a third of Americans are considered obese, and another third are considered overweight. Why? Biology. Genetics does have something to do with it. People are born with a certain metabolism. Some people can burn off food easier than others. That's just a piece. So genetics, yes, that's a piece of it. Normalization of obesity. In other words, everybody else is overweight. It's normal. That's another reason why you're seeing it. It's not looked on as poorly as it used to be because it's normal now. The availability of food. You see it. You see high calorie, high fat foods all over the place. It's easy. The affordability. It is cheaper to go to McDonald's and get stuff that's high calorie, high fat than it is cheaper and quicker. So it's affordability and availability of the high calorie, high fat foods. It's cheaper and easier to go to McDonald's and get the high calorie, high fat foods than it is to go to the grocery store, find whatever fruits or vegetables that are on sale, compare the prices, take them home, cook them, okay? Plus, fruits and vegetables don't keep very long, so you run the chance of them going bad before you can eat them. So there's a lot of different things that are in there. It can be work to eat healthier. So there's all these little, it's harder work to eat healthier. It can be more expensive to eat healthier. Normalization of being overweight and obese. Also, one of the big things that lead to obesity is a sedentary lifestyle. People sitting around and not getting up and moving as much as they used to. Our society has become more sedentary, especially when you look at kids and adolescents. So those are some of the reasons. We can delve into how do you solve it, and in the end, how do you lose weight? You burn off more than you take in. It's as easy and as difficult as that. That's the bottom line. In order to lose weight, you have to burn off more than you take in. Well, that's not easy. It's not easy to resist. It's not easy to exercise, especially if you have physical limitations. So I'm not saying it's easy. The theory is easy. In other words, that the Yeah, that's what you have to do. But getting there is not easy. So that's obesity. The last thing in terms of eating is eating disorders. Wanted to go over a couple of the major ones. Major ones are anorexia and bulimia. Anorexia is when somebody, and usually it's very much more women than men, and young women. And this is a disorder that hits middle to upper class women even more, because it just does. And what it is usually it starts with somebody who has control issues. They want to be able to control things. They have pressure to perform, and they find, and maybe they're just a little bit overweight and they decide to do something about it. And they find, I can do this. I can decide not to eat. And they get that control. They lose a couple pounds and they feel the rush of that control. And they're like, I can do this. Well, what happens is, psychologically, they're scared to death of giving up that control. They're scared that if they decide to eat, they're going to open the floodgates. And they're going to eat so much, they're going to gain and they're going to get fat. That's part of it. The other part of anorexia is a distorted body image. When they look at themselves in the mirror, they don't see themselves as unhealthily thin. They don't see themselves as sick. So there's the two things going on. One is the control issue. The other is the distorted body image. Put those together, and anorexia is one of the most difficult disorders to treat, because it's very difficult to force a teenager or young adult to eat. You can put them in the hospital and put tubes in them, but they can pull them out. So it's really difficult. The other eating disorder is bulimia. And bulimia, the classic bulimia, is binge and purge. And it's, you eat a bunch of food and then you throw it up. That's classic. Now, bulimia does not have to be throwing up. The binge and purge, you could be getting rid of it in other ways. There are people who are bulimic that use laxative, use diet pills, exercise to an unhealthy extent to try to exercise off every pound. So, although throwing up is the most common form of bulimia, there's other forms. So that's anorexia and bulimia. That's eating disorders. So that's hunger and eating. What are some other things? Another big motivation thing is talking about sex. When you talk about motivation in general psych, sex is a big topic that comes up. Why? Well, that's one thing that human beings do. What is sexual motivation? Why do we do it? Well, we do it, kind of think about the same things as eating. Physiological, the hormones are going through our bodies. Hormones, there's such a thing as pheromones in terms of we're smelling things, we're seeing things. So inside the hormones, we also have things like hormones like testosterone. We also have external things, sights, sounds. We're seeing things, okay? You see a good-looking person that you are attracted to. It makes you think of it, and it gives you motivation. So there's physiological with the body chemistry, and then there's psychological with seeing things. There's peer pressure, all the stuff in the media with thinking that everybody's doing it. If you look at the statistics, about half of American teenagers have had sex by the time they're seniors, by the time they're graduating from high school. Half. May sound like a lot, but think about this, half haven't. So just because you haven't doesn't mean that you are one of the little minority, it's just you're in the half that haven't. So but the media is another reason. It portrays it as everybody's doing it. So there's physiological, there's psychological. There are two big researchers in terms of sex. There's Kinsey, which is a well-known researcher because Kinsey was a person that did a big, humongous survey back in the mid-1900s and asked a lot of detailed questions. And Kinsey is the one that first let people know how often people were doing it and what they were doing and things like that. They did a really large-scale survey. Well, Masters and Johnson came away later, and they got a lot more detailed. They actually watched people doing it and recorded physiological responses, and they were the ones that came up with the details about how the sex act worked. So that's kind of what they're known for. Kinsey's more known for just the survey responses of how many people are doing it and what are they doing. So we have Kinsey, Masters, and Johnson's. There's a couple things that also come up when we talk about sex. One is this idea of sexual orientation, homosexual versus heterosexual. There's this big, it's been all over the news for a while of LGBT rights and things like that. So the question is, there's a couple things. One is nature versus nurture. Are people, quote, born that way? And there's this idea of conversion therapy. Well, let's tackle both of those questions. And I know this is a hot topic, and I'm just going to tell you my thoughts and opinions. Are people born that way? There is a genetic predisposition. There is a genetic component. Okay? So, are people born that way? Yeah, kind of. I think people are born with a genetic predisposition. Does environment affect it? Yes. If you're born with the predisposition, but you're told, no, thou must not do that, sometimes people fight against it. Okay? Somebody who is born with a predisposition that finds even one person that says this is okay may decide not to fight against it. So there's a lot of, I believe it's when you say nature versus nurture, both. I really do think people are born with a predisposition and born with certain feelings, but then your environment and your experiences and what you've been through help determine how those feelings are going to be played out. So there's that. The other thing is the conversion therapy. There's a lot of things, there's been some things that's not as popular as it used to be. There's some things about, can you change somebody? Well, it's not highly successful. There hasn't been a lot of good luck, and I think I would look at it as one of those things that's it's possible but not probable. In other words, it's difficult, it's possible. I believe it's possible but not probable because I think there are those innate predispositions. So, that being said, and feel free to comment, because I know there's lots of opinions on the matter. The next thing when it comes to sexual behavior is gender identity, which is different than sexual behavior. It's put in there because it's this whole idea of sex and who are you and your identity when it comes to that. The gender identity is not your biological sex. It's not whether you're biologically male or female. It's what do you feel like? Who do you associate with? Do I identify? Do I feel like I'm female? In my case, yes. So in my case, my gender identity and my biological sex match. That's not always the case. And it's different than transgender because some people who have differing gender identities than their biological sex have transgendered, some have not. So this is one of those complicated issues. Okay, but gender identity is how you identify. So that's sex. So we have motivation that we've talked about. That's the first big part of the chapter, motivation. In general, motivation. Then we talked about hunger and then we talked about sex. The other piece, when you talk about motivation and emotion, is emotion. And when you're talking about emotion, you're talking about feelings. And feelings, there is the physiological response, there's the cognitive component, and then there's the action you take on it. In other words, inside, do I feel excited? Do I think I'm excited? Do I act excited? Okay? So it's that cognitive component, the feeling component, and the action are the different components of motivation. Well, what are the theories? In other words, how do we feel things? Well, the first one is James Lange. James Lange basically said that emotions are a direct result of physiology. My heart's beating fast, I'm breathing heavy, I am scared. It's directly interpreted as fear. There is a specific biological pattern to each emotion. That would be James Lange. Okay? And the physiology happens, and then boom, that's the emotion. Cannon-Bard said, it happens at the same time. It happens at the same time, and there are some emotions where two different emotions have the same physiology. So Cannon-Bard said, it's not that you have the physiology and then the emotion, it's that it happens at the same time. And then Schachter Singer said, okay, you guys, you guys forgot the cognitive component. You have the feelings, you have what you're doing, and you also have to interpret it and think about it before you label it. So Schachter Singer came up with that cognitive component. Those are the main theories. Biology of emotions. Okay, where in our brain do feelings come from? A lot of our feelings come from the part of the brain called the amygdala. It's known for fight or flight, known for fear and anger. However, that's the part of the brain that is kind of the major part for the actual feeling. Now, what other parts of the brain are involved? Well, our frontal lobe is also involved because what do we do with that feeling and how do we express it? That's where the frontal lobe comes in. The frontal lobe comes in terms of interpreting what the amygdala is saying and deciding what to do about it. In other words, you're driving down the road, somebody cuts you off, you may feel angry. Amygdala, feel angry, feel angry. But then your frontal lobe would say, calm down, calm down. You don't want to get in an accident, blah, blah, blah. Your frontal lobe kind of interprets that and helps deal with it. That's the biology of emotion. Okay. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about is facial expressions. And there's two things with that. One is our facial expressions universal. When somebody says when somebody's happy, or somebody's bored, is that universal? Can you tell by what expression somebody's wearing what their emotions are? In some cases, yes. There are some basic emotions that are culturally universal. We could look at faces of people from totally different cultures and get an idea of what they're feeling. Now, we are better able to read emotional expressions of people of our same makeup, because basically we're better able to read facial expressions from the type of people that we've been around. So facial expressions that we're used to, because we have more experience with it. So that makes sense. But in general, there is some universal emotions. Okay? There's also this thing called the facial feedback hypothesis. And that's kind of the last thing I want to leave you with. And that is the emotion that we make, the expression that we make with our face can actually help us feel that emotion. In other words, I'm sitting in a lecture and I'm bored. Okay? What I do is, in my lectures, I have people take a pencil and put it in their teeth. It makes you grin. what happens is, if you leave it there long enough, you actually will start to feel happier. I encourage you to try it. That's the facial feedback hypothesis. The expression that you make, you start feeling more that direction. If you make a sad face, you'll start feeling sadder. If you make a happy face, you'll start feeling happy. That's emotion, motivation, and emotion. I'm going to finish my Coke Zero.